Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Dan Harris. Find me on Twitter at DanHarris80. It is Friday. It is week 9, so we're in for a special version today of our usual Friday show. But first, as we do every single Friday, we're going to welcome in Dr. David Chao from ProFootballDoc.com. Find him on Twitter at ProFootballDoc. Doc, thanks for fitting us in today. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, no problem. Sorry about some background noise. There's some saws going on, surgeries going on, and overhead announcements,
There you go. That's all right. We appreciate it. Again, I want to make it clear right now. We usually record this sort of in the early afternoon where we at least have some practice reports, a little more Friday practice information. Because of some scheduling issues on my end, we are recording this early in the morning here on Friday. So we really have no details whatsoever to work on off Friday. So bear with us a little bit as we get there. Let's start, though, Doc, with Kyler Murray. And again, he had the Thursday game last week. He injured his ankle at the very end of that game. He might be declared out in this game for all we know, but let's just assume for sake of argument that he's not declared out, that he is good to go. Do you expect him to be limited in this game based on what you saw last week?
Well, there's no question he had a sprained ankle, eversion sprain, and it was on that first down, non-first down play towards the end of the game. And there's no question it affected him. On the interception, he didn't step into the throw. Now, it was still a good throw, but, sure. It obviously affected him. I've always felt, based on video of the injury, and that's what I go off of more, the injury itself, rather than the reaction to the injury. And the reaction can be the coach speaking, the line movements, right, in Vegas and, whatever, or various reports. By video, my feeling is that he could play through. Now, I get it. We're all nervous. 2 straight DNPs. What's going to happen today? I think most likely it's going to be LP questionable, but we'll see, right? I mean, we don't have that information yet, just based on looking at the video. Now, I think it could definitely affect him in mobility. It shouldn't affect him as much in terms of throwing, although his mechanics and stepping into throws. This is not a pure high ankle sprain where his foot was planted, where he's going to be very limited. I think he definitely could play, and I think he still is in reach of playing. And the difference between Kyler and Dak Prescott last week, this is not a question of Kyler Murray's toughness or Dak Prescott's toughness. Dallas, had Cooper Rush. The Cardinals have Colt McCoy. You can make your judgments either way. But the point is, Dallas had a 3/4 game lead in the NFC East. The Cardinals have a better record, but they don't have that lead, right? And This is a divisional opponent, okay? And first it's head-to-head for tiebreakers, and it's division record. So this is more important. So if he can go at all, I think he will, and I still keep hope alive, although we've heard the whispers of that he's not playing in Vegas and this, that, the other, and line movements, but we don't react off of that. We just react off of what we see related to video.
So let's stick with the Cardinals and talk about DeAndre Hopkins then, who obviously looks like he's been battling this hamstring issue a little bit on and off. He did play, then he kind of tweaked it again during that long catch that he had right at the beginning of the game. And again, kind of went rogue, as we talked about last week, and came back into the game. He's missed practice so far. We don't know about today. What do you think about him?
I think he's going to be out, right? I mean, between the 2 Cardinals guys, Kyler Murray up, DeAndre Hopkins down. And here's why. First of all, anytime you don't finish a game, he went into that Thursday game with a hamstring issue, did not finish. Really kind of the first big target, right? He made a big contribution. He essentially exited, right? Now he went rogue and came back in. No coach wants to play shorthanded with 45, right? And so I think he's going to be out for this game. And the surest way to make sure, and I say this jokingly, I'm not saying it, the surest way to make him not go rogue is not put him in uniform, right?
Yeah.
And kind of thing. And the whole key is you don't want to turn this into a lingering, lasting, make it worse deal by forcing your way through it. So even though he had 10 days before, I lean towards he's going to be out. And even if he's in, our SIC scores, 6 score, is going to be relatively low, right? I mean, you can't expect him for re-aggravation and production to be at his usual level.
That was going to be my next question, was if he does suit up, I'm going to assume that his 6 score is going to be pretty low considering everything like that, but you answered it.
It was, 50-ish before the last game based on
47,
the
I
hamstring.
believe, Doc. I was looking at it closely. I always do before the games. That's where I got to go.
Yep.
All right, let's go to Christian McCaffrey here. Again, we don't know yet. We'll see what happens right now. Start off, I think, with an LP. They sound optimistic, but we've heard this before. What do you think about McCaffrey just based on, his time frame?
Based on his time frame, he was hurt in Houston. It was a game that I actually went to. Disappointing that he got hurt early. And then they did not put him on injured reserve. They thought maybe they can get him back for the third game. And then obviously he aggravated it, even though Matt Rule denied a setback. He was limited practice and then went DNP and then went to IR. We don't know how bad the aggravation was. We don't have video on that. But I've said to you for a while and to the Fantasy Pros listeners, I'm more confident in Christian McCaffrey than I am Chris Carson. That neck thing can go a whole bunch of different ways. The hamstring's going to get better. It's a matter of time. And I think right now it's long enough. I've heard the pessimism from Matt Rule this week. Oh, he was very limited, and reporters saying he was just on the bike in the portion he's normally there. But teams can manipulate that, right? Christian, you go ride the bike and then you come here.
Right.
I mean, the element of surprise in coach speak can go both ways. And honestly, I don't really rely on coach speak. I rely on the eyes, ears, and the injury itself. And I still lean towards Christian McCaffrey playing. Now, your question is going to be, if he plays, what's his utilization going to be? Well, that's a Matt Rule and Joe Brady thing, right? And my expectation is that because they're a very analytics heavy team, right, that they won't go 100% Christian McCaffrey. They'll probably go 75, 80% Christian McCaffrey, right? In terms of his usual. But 75, 80% of Christian McCaffrey is 100% of everybody else.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, I'm with you. How about David Montgomery, Doc? I was a little surprised by this. I believe they have a bye next week. So I kind of just assumed, okay, we'll wait till after the bye, then maybe come back at week 11 against the Ravens. But this now we've seen video of him returning David Montgomery back to individual drills. They're talking about how it's a possibility. It's a Monday night game. So hopefully we have resolution of it before then. But just, do you think there's a realistic chance that he's going to be able to suit up here in week 9? And if so, do you think he can be effective?
I don't think he's playing. Okay. I've seen some of the video that's been posted. There's one on my timeline, I think, from Brad Biggs that I retweeted and posted, and he's not ready. He looks great because he's an NFL athlete, right? I mean, he gets through those cones, but if you watch his mechanics, I did not remember which knee was injured on David Montgomery, but I looked at that video and it said he's favoring his left knee. That's not a one-plant cut. He's not ready to go. So even with the Monday game, I think they make use of the bye and he comes back week 11. That's David Montgomery. And, I won't call anyone out, but in the past, when I've done some of this video analysis of practice, don't be surprised if you go back and click on it now that the tweet's deleted or pulled down, because teams don't really love that.
Right. I get it. I get it.
They want if you go to my Twitter and it's pulled down, I didn't pull it down. The team and the whatever made the reporter pull it down.
Yeah, teams like to play things a little close to the chest there. All right, real quick on this one. I'm hoping, Dak Prescott, are we just full on good to go this week?
I am as confident that he's good to go this week or more than I was not confident or saying that he was out last week, right? And that was an interesting exercise of back and forth. And even pregame was kind of fun. I actually paused watching the game to see all the Twitter beat reporters tweet his video and this thing. And to me, last week was obvious he wasn't going to play because of all the circumstances that we talked about, or fairly obvious anyways. And then pregame, I was like, there's no way that guy's playing. I mean, They put him through a hard workout, and everyone was saying, oh, look, he looks great. He doesn't skip a beat. They worked him out hard. He passed every test. He's going to play. I'm like, no, you don't fatigue a strained muscle to then play the guy and risk aggravation. And it kind of came out as scripted. And once again, we've talked about no true game time decisions. Look, I love the national reporters. Okay. But do you think, and I love Chris Mortensen, he's the best, right? He's the OG. Do you really think Jerry Jones then picked up the phone and said, Chris, we're not playing him. You can release it now after on field? No, they talked about it and they said, look, this is the way we're going to go. You can do it 5 minutes before the 90-minute inactive, right? I mean, he's not calling in from the field on a cell phone and saying, hey, release this, Chris. I mean, yeah, it's just the way that it works. Once again, not a true game time decision.
All right, last one, Doc. Russell Wilson, I think it was no more pin time to win was the tweet that he put out or something like that. What do we think? I mean, does the pin removed? Because I honestly, this was my initial question. Does pin removed mean like, okay, with a couple of extra days now because of the bye, he's just going to be good to go? I mean, what do we think next week? You think he's going to be able to play?
Well, they're still healing. Look, I do think it's possible for him to play. I mean, right after the surgery and what was announced, I targeted week 10 as the goal. Not the guarantee, but the goal. So I think it's realistic. And he's, quote, throwing some, but 5 yards, 10 yards. And if you really watch some of his videos, like Russell Wilson's the best. I mean, he crafts a great image. He's Tom Brady-esque. He says the right things. And, it's good. It's awesome. But look, is he ready yet today? No. I mean, some of those short passes, I mean, if you're a quarterback and your trainer puts up the hands right here, you usually don't have to move an inch. There were a couple where the guy had to go just a little bit, but that's like a 5-8 yard pass. And so accuracy, but that was also his first time throwing. So give him a chance with the finger. It won't be 100% healed. He's not a guaranteed to play, but I think there is greater than 50-50 chance right now. And we still have time that he will week 10.
He's Dr. David Chow. Go check him out on Twitter at ProFootballDoc and his website at ProFootballDoc.com, which, again, I check out all the time. The 6 score is something that really gives me confidence, at least when I'm making my injury evaluations as a ranker. We're going to get now to our game-by-game preview, a very special edition of that, so we'll be right there.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into my segment of today's episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Wormley, and today I'm filling in for Dan Harris as host of our Friday episode, and joining me as an analyst for today's episode is Dan Harris. Dan, as somebody who actually knows and cherishes Community as a seminal modern sitcom, unlike Yates, do I have your permission to call today a little Dan and Ryan in the morning?
Not just my permission, but my blessing. Absolutely. Yates still has no idea what that is. Dan and Kyle in the morning. Zero clue whatsoever. Never seen an episode. No idea. So this is refreshing for me to have somebody who understands what I will, I have to call it a pretty genius title for this podcast episode.
Well, he has no excuse anymore to not know what it is, because we specifically talked about it on the first episode I ever did with him. And I even messaged him afterward, and I was like, listen, I know you haven't seen this before. I'm not going to judge you, but go watch it now. This thing's incredible. And he still hasn't. He's had plenty of time at this point, so I don't feel bad making fun of him. I am the social media guy, for those who don't know me, here at Fantasy Pros. So let me quickly give you Dan's Twitter handle. It's at DanHarris80. Although, full disclosure, yesterday he implied to me that he would actually prefer fewer Twitter followers for some reason. I have no explanation for that. My handle is at Ryan Wormley, like how you dress when it's cold outside. And of course, you can always find Fantasy Pros all over the internet at Fantasy Pros. You can also find us at fantasypros.com/contest, of course, where you can go to sign up to try and win a free signed Chris Godwin jersey. He's a Super Bowl champion, one of Tom Brady's favorite targets, a fantastic receiver to roster in fantasy, and a fantastic jersey to put up in your man cave. If you subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros, where some of you may be watching this very video, you can get up to 3 entries into the giveaway contest without doing any extra work. And speaking of making things easier on our listeners, you can also get all the best possible fantasy advice from the primer without having to read through every single player in that behemoth of an article. If you use the My Primer tool, it highlights every player on every one of your teams, so you can make quick and easy start-sit decisions with the help of Pat Fitzmaurice and Kyle Yates, who are teaming up to honor Tags and his legacy with the primer every single week of this fantasy football season. It's totally free, so please sync your leagues for free today at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Dan, over under 9.5 out of 10. How ready are you for the Fantasy Pros over under challenge?
2.5.
So under would be
That's
the
correct.
answer to my question then.
Correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that you were actually paying attention and you would be listening to what I was saying so that you could go under.
We're off to a stirring start here. You know the drill, obviously. fantasypros.com/challenge. It's completely free to play thanks to our lovely friends at Caesars. 10 fantasy point over-under picks. There are weekly prizes and a season-long grand prize, which is a 2-night stay at a Caesars Las Vegas resort, plus airfare. Again, just go to fantasypros.com/challenge to play along. Let's start with Jalen Hurts at home against the Chargers, over-under 20.9 fantasy points.
I don't feel real confident about this one, but I am going to go over. I think he gets it done on the ground where the Chargers are very susceptible. So I will go over on this one.
I'm going to go under because he does struggle through the air, and the Chargers' pass defense is obviously very strong. And I think they're going to ride more of the Jordan Howard, Boston Scott, perhaps Kenneth Gainwell folks instead of Jalen Hurts' legs in that one. Next one, the quarterback on the other side of that matchup, Justin Herbert on the road against the Eagles, 21.5 over under.
I'm also going to go slightly over on this one. I do think that he bounces back here after a rough game against New England. So, again, this is kind of what he does. Good game, bad game, good game, bad game. I'm going to go with the good game here and go over.
Yeah, and he's kind of coming off 2 bad games because he has had the bye in between there. Bad against the Ravens, bye week, bad against the Patriots. I'm going over as well for a bounce back for Justin Herbert. He's just too talented not to. Alvin Kamara at home against Atlanta, 18.7 fantasy points, and this is half-point PPR.
Yeah, and we just learned before we started recording that it is going to be Trevor Siemian, not Taysom Hill, which I think actually helps Alvin Kamara. So I probably would have gone under with Hill just because I don't think that the passing volume would have been there, but I will now go over with Siemian.
Yeah, I had sort of the same line of thinking. When it was Taysom Hill, I was very ready to go under, but I'm going to go over here. And especially now with Siemian, just what else are they going to do? They don't have a ton of people to throw to right now. They don't have a great quarterback. It's going to be the Alvin Kamara show. Ezekiel Elliott at home against Denver, 15.5 points.
Yeah, I'm going over. I think he's going to find the end zone in this one. The Denver has really struggled lately against running backs with all their injuries, so I think he's going to eat and score a touchdown here. I'll go over.
Just for the sake of mixing it up, I'm going to go under. I think that this might be a big Tony Pollard game where he just gets going and they say, you know what, let's ride the hot hand. Moving on to Chase Edmonds on the road against the 49ers, 11.4 fantasy points over under.
I'm going to go under. I know he scored the touchdown, in the last game, but I don't expect this to be much of a shootout. I also don't know who's going to be starting at quarterback right now, so I'm going to fade mostly Cardinals offense here. I'm going to go under.
I'm going to go against you again and go over. I'm going to say even with Kyler Murray perhaps not playing, but at the very least somewhat banged up, I think they lean even more heavily on Edmonds. Cooper Kupp, obviously been pretty much the best player in fantasy all season long. At home against the Titans, a ridiculous 19.3 is his over-under. Where are you going?
I'm going over. I realize it's a ridiculous number, but not only is Cooper Kupp amazing, but it's a great matchup here against the Titans, who really struggle against slot receivers in particular. So I'm going over.
Yeah, I could have said pretty much any number, and I would have said over. I mean, at this point, how could you not with what Cooper Kupp has done so far this season? CeeDee Lamb at home against the Broncos, 14.0 fantasy points.
I'm going to go under just because he's got the ankle injury, so I don't know how much that is going to impact him necessarily. And Denver has a relatively good secondary. They do have some injuries there right now, Bryce Callahan and everything, but I'm still going to go under here for Lamb.
I'm also going under purely for the injury reasons. Didn't practice on Thursday, has that ankle issue that flared up in the middle to late part of the week, which always concerns me. So I'll go under there, just play it safe. Jaylen Waddle at home against the Texans, 11.6.
It's actually not a great matchup for Waddle. The Texans are pretty decent against slot wide receivers. But again, we just learned right before we started recording this that Devontae Parker had a setback and he's now going to be doubtful. That really leaves Waddle as the guy. So I think he finds a way to get it done here. I'll go over.
I'm going to go over as well, but it's less so because of Parker and more so because with Tyrod Taylor coming back, I think the Texans offense could look pretty decent. They actually looked pretty good before he got hurt in that game against the Browns back in the first month of the season. So I'm going to say that this might be sort of a surprise shootout this week, and in that case, Jaylen Waddle gets the targets he needs to go over that number. Rashard Higgins on the road against the Bengals, and just before you answer this one, obviously, we found out that OBJ is now been released from the Browns, so do you think Higgins now steps up? 11.9 is his number.
I do think that the, one catch and 19 yards that's now vacated by OBJ being gone really makes an impact here for me. I'm going under. Somebody, probably some receiver, whether it's Donovan Peoples-Jones or whether it's Higgins, will have a good game here. I just don't know which one it's going to be, so I'm just going to fade both of them at this point, and I'm going to go under.
Yeah, I think Cincinnati is going to be angry coming off that loss to the Jets. I think especially their defense is going to come out and play angry, and this is a talented unit, so I think that they will do a pretty good job of locking down Higgins. And then finally, my guy, Mark Andrews, tight end on the Ravens, at home against the Vikings, 11.6 fantasy points over-under.
I don't think you'd allow me to go under with this one, given your homerism. I will go over, though. I think he finds the end zone. I expect Baltimore to come out firing here after the bye.
Yeah, sort of similar to Cooper Kupp, but for different reasons. It didn't matter what this number was. I was going to take the over, so very easily over on Mark Andrews for me. Let's move on to the Thursday night football game, and hopefully not spend too much time on it because it was pretty boring, which is weird to say for a 45-30 game, but this just wasn't a very enjoyable primetime game. We've had a lot of them this season. Lately, we started to get more and more of these duds. The game was certainly not as close as the 45-30 looked. Let's just start with Michael Carter, everybody's favorite breakout after week 8. Just 13 rushes for 49 yards. More troublingly, only 2 targets. 1 catch, it did go for 37 yards. Of course, Mike White got injured early, and he had been peppering Carter with targets. So are you overly concerned about Carter's bad performance? Are you thinking that week 8 was more the outlier, or week 9 is more the outlier for him?
It's probably somewhere in between. I've been high on Carter, and I was coming into this game, and just the Mike White injury completely destroys it. Johnson had no interest in targeting the running backs whatsoever, either him or Ty Johnson, who, again, I had over on his prop of 2.5 receptions. So I'm willing to largely throw this out. I am hopeful that when Zach Wilson returns, he will sort of continue the Mike White script, with the understanding that it has worked pretty well. So I'm largely throwing this game out. And again, it's a pretty terrible game here for Carter, and he still gets you, basically 10 half PPR fantasy points, so you can live with it.
You're throwing this game out, but you might not want to do that for Elijah Moore. 7 catches, 84 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This is a guy that was super talented coming out of Ole Miss in the draft. Everybody thought he could be one of these, maybe take a couple weeks and then blows up as a rookie receiver, a la a Justin Jefferson type. Obviously not expecting on that level, but he is a really talented receiver. And do you think this is his big breakout game, or do you think this is, again, more of a flash in the pan?
Again, somewhere in between. I don't think that he's suddenly going to be this reliable wide receiver 3 necessarily or anything like that, but he is coming off a game where he caught 6 passes and had a decent yardage total. So I do think that he's going to continue to get more involved. The Jets targeted him in the draft. They were very excited when they were able to land him, so he is a part of their game plan. And I expect if he and Zach Wilson can just get some time together and stay on the same page, that he will be sort of a guy who you can probably plug in most weeks as kind of a borderline flex play. But I don't really think that this is suddenly a guy who you feel confident starting each and every week.
I did sort of, hand up, bury the lead here. Jonathan Taylor, 20 rushes, 172 yards, 2 touchdowns, also had 2 catches for 28 yards. How many running backs are you ranking ahead of him rest of the season?
I think in my rest of season rankings, my most recent ones, I had 2 running backs ahead of him. I'm actually pulling it up right now. Oh, no, I had 5 ahead of him. But to be clear, I had Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, and then Taylor. But as Yates has mentioned on this, when I do my rest of season rankings, it is, okay, what's their value going to be from this point forward? Jonathan Taylor is the only one of those players who still has his bye to come. So it factored in the fact that he's going to miss a week. Once he has passed that bye, and maybe even not, top 3 at a minimum, and he's going to push now without Derrick Henry for possibly the top spot, depending on when Christian McCaffrey gets back.
Have you seen enough from Carson Wentz to feel comfortable starting him going forward, or are you still just so gun-shy about, he's going to have a 4-turnover game, he's going to get hurt, he's going to do something hilariously, impossibly dumb on the field, which seems very likely any given Sunday? Are you still concerned about that if you have him on your fantasy roster? Or, this is 22 of 30, 272 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's been fairly efficient this season. How confident are you in him going forward?
I think he's going to generally rank outside of my top 12 each and every week, just because the top 12 is a pretty strong group of quarterbacks. But he is a guy who is going to be a streamer in the right situation, and he was this week as well. I think I had him ranked 13th this week, as I'm pulling up my rankings and stalling so I can do that. No, I had him ranked 14th. So that's a guy who's, on the borderline of a startable option, and I think in the right matchup, that's basically where he's going to fall.
Now, I haven't seen anything. I don't know if you, as a Jets fan, have seen anything that I might have missed. Has there been an injury update on Mike White?
No, it's a vague forearm injury that they expect him to be able to play again this season. It was very bizarre because they didn't even declare him out, right? He was just on the sidelines, clearly not playing, and they're like, oh, no, he's questionable. He's questionable. We'll see. But it is, I mean, Zach Wilson, obviously they didn't place Zach Wilson on IR, so it's possible that Zach Wilson comes back next week anyway. And, you know, all the funny talk aside, they're not going to Mike White for the rest of the season. They're going to see what they have in Wilson. So I think probably the Mike White experiment is over, most likely for the time being, but I don't necessarily know if he's going to be out for the season or anything.
R.I.P. to the Mike White experiment. That'd be a great name for a band if anybody out there is looking to start one day. Let's move into our matchup previews. Obviously, we have a ton of games to get through, just 4 teams on bye this week. We will start with a pretty big matchup in the AFC North. Browns at the Bengals. Obviously, you have guys like Joe Mixon, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, all in your top 10 or 11 at their various positions. T. Higgins is in the top 20 for you. So the guy that I want to first ask you about is Tyler Boyd, because he's a really talented receiver. He's in a high-powered offense, but he seems to be pretty clearly Joe Burrow's third or maybe even fourth favorite option in that passing game. How excited are you if you have him in your lineup, and how willing are you to start him?
Pretty willing to start him as like a borderline wide receiver 3. I think he's 34th right now. I never feel comfortable with Boyd just because you really only feel comfortable, for me anyway, with Chase, even though I rank T. Higgins as a borderline wide receiver 2 each and every week. I am going to start him in this one. I think there'll be enough volume here. I expect kind of a spirited effort here from the Browns offense without OBJ. I think they're going to rally a little bit, so I think that's going to cause the Bengals to need points to throw a little bit more. But again, he just falls in this conglomerate of wide receiver 3s that you don't really feel great about, but are probably going to get enough volume to basically be slightly worth startable. So I will start Tyler Boyd, 34th, so as a low-end wide receiver 3 for me.
Now, sticking with the Bengals, you do have CJ Uzomah ranked lower than any other Fantasy Pros expert. You've got him 17th this week. The other guys have him 12th, 13th, and 16th. So not that far off, but definitely the lowest guy. What about him are you not seeing that you need to see to feel comfortable starting him?
They're called targets, and he doesn't get enough. And Uzomah is great. I love him. I think there is always the possibility that he's going to explode, but targets are the ball game pretty much here for tight ends. And again, you know, we'll see, you know, in the end what exactly I do with all these guys. Because again, he is, as you mentioned, 17th. If he ends up 16th or 15th, maybe by the time I do my projection sweep on Saturday night, that's possible. But I'm not looking to start a guy who, you know, sees like 3 targets a game. It's just, you know, there's enough of that out there that I'm willing to go with guys who are a little more reliable.
In 8 games this season, he has finished first twice at the position, 12th once, and no other times has he even been top 20. So definitely a very hit-or-miss guy at tight end. Looking at the Browns, we mentioned it at the top of the show, Odell Beckham Jr. has been released by the team. This was rumored for a couple of days after he wasn't traded at the deadline. Is there anybody on the roster? You sort of mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashard Higgins. How does this impact Baker Mayfield? What's your number one takeaway from the OBJ news on the Browns, even though, as you alluded to, not exactly the highest volume guy this season?
Yeah, it really doesn't make much of an impact for me whatsoever. I mean, Jarvis Landry was already seeing the targets, and I want to start Landry in this matchup. The Bengals allowed the 7th most fantasy points to slot wide receivers, so this is a good matchup for Landry. And, you know, if you want to say that he'll slightly be the focal point more, I just think that the entire Browns offense is going to be a little more efficient, just because that's kind of what it's been with Baker Mayfield and OBJ. Without him, he has played better, whether he doesn't want to force it. I wouldn't be surprised if one of Rashard Higgins or Donovan Peoples-Jones has a good game. They'll just be on my bench if so.
Dan, let's move now to Broncos at Cowboys. The Cowboys obviously did very well without Dak Prescott in Week 8. Cooper Rush filled in quite admirably. It appears by all accounts that Dak will be starting here in Week 9. Obviously, with CeeDee Lamb having the ankle issues, that is a bit of a concern, but I have to assume it's all systems go for the entire Cowboys offense if Dak's back.
Yes, legit start everyone that you can in that offense. I mean, if Michael Gallup plays, I probably wouldn't start him just because there would be question marks, but we're talking Amari Cooper, we're talking CeeDee Lamb, Dak himself, both running backs, Dalton Schultz. Fire them all up. This should be a good one. And, you know, a decent defense here with the Broncos. But, again, they traded Von Miller. They lost Bryce Callahan. They're in a little bit of trouble. So fire them all up.
Do you expect CeeDee Lamb to play based on everything you've heard?
Yeah, I do. I'm worried a little bit. Just I don't like popping up on we talked about it a little bit. I don't like popping up on the injury report in the middle of the week. And again, this wasn't just something. This was a specific like, oh, he sprained his ankle here. This is exactly when it happened. I do think he'll go. I wouldn't surprise me if he has a little bit of a down game. For right now, again, everything I've heard is he's going to go, and I'm ranking him strong. So we'll see about it. But unless we hear something negative, I would start him as a full go, even if I did take the under on his over/under challenge.
On the Broncos side of things, obviously a little disappointing for fantasy managers who roster Javonte Williams to not see Melvin Gordon traded at the deadline. The Broncos obviously were willing to trade away talented players. They, of course, gave the Rams Von Miller, but they did not move their veteran running back. So Javonte Williams, despite being perhaps the best tackle breaker in the NFL right now of any of their running backs, having a very efficient rookie season, although he's not getting the volume to make a large impact yet. Are you still excited to start him in hopes that we're going to see a breakout week sooner rather than later?
No, but I'm never excited to start Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon. I think what you can basically do is look at my rankings every single week, look between 23 and 26, and that is where you will find both running backs. They are guys who you can start as borderline RB2s. You know exactly what's going to happen. They're both going to get, 10 to 12 touches. Hopefully they find the end zone and you move on. And I have Gordon one spot ahead of Javonte Williams. So if you have to start one, it's Gordon. But there is no excitement level with either guy.
In our staff rankings, we have Courtland Sutton 23rd and Jerry Jeudy 25th. You have a bit of a wider gap there. Why do you prefer Sutton this week?
Again, I'm actually lower on both than whatever our consensus is because I have Sutton 26th, I believe, and Jeudy 31st. I love Jerry Jeudy. Sutton, for me, I just assume he's going to get Trayvon Diggs. And Diggs isn't like this completely, shut down corner necessarily, but he's very good and he does like to shadow. So that makes me a little less excited about Sutton. With Jeudy, who I love, I think it's a little bit more about Teddy Bridgewater, who's just hasn't really been throwing the ball down the field as much lately. Seems like the interceptions a little bit. Maybe the coaching staff talked to him and said, look, you got to rein it in a little bit. So just the whole passing game from the Broncos is not something that I'm actively looking to target here, even though obviously they should need points to keep up with Dallas.
And even though Tim Patrick hasn't necessarily seen the targets go away completely, you still have him significantly lower than the other guys. He did have just 3 this past week, but he did get 64 yards out of it. Are you just thinking sort of like Tyler Boyd, he's just the clear third fiddle here?
Yeah, and the third fiddle in the Bengals offense is a lot more desirable than the third fiddle, here. And again, we don't know about Noah Fant, obviously, if he plays or not, or if not, Albert O makes, a decent sort of streamer option. But Patrick, who I love and I think has been undervalued for a while, is just not a guy who I want to start here with Jeudy back.
Texans at Dolphins. This is a game that either you live in Houston, you live in Miami, or you're a degenerate. Otherwise, I cannot imagine anybody else is watching this game. There are still some fantasy guys that you can come away and maybe get some points out of. One of those guys probably won't be Devontae Parker because right before we started recording, came out that he had suffered a setback. He's doubtful with both a shoulder and a hamstring injury, so that is obviously disconcerting. Again, we mentioned that a little at the top of the show. You're obviously starting Mike Gesicki with the way he's looked as of late. Myles Gaskin, is that somebody that you're still thinking is like a strong RB2 at this point, or is that too generous?
No, I think you start Myles Gaskin with relative confidence, but I have him ranked 15th, which makes me feel really uncomfortable. It's just the matchup. There are two things, really. The matchup with the Texans, they get destroyed by running backs. And second, without Malcolm Brown, he's just good for 15 touches a week, and that's what you're going to have. And now, again, you don't have Devontae Parker in this game. There just aren't that many options for, Tua. Hopefully it's Tua, by the way. Tua apparently has a finger injury, which I just heard about right as we were starting recording. Lovely. And he's probably going to play. Brian Flores is optimistic, but, I don't want to hear that he's optimistic he's going to play. I want to hear he's going to play. So who knows with this? At this point, I do expect Gaskin to get a lot of run here in a great matchup. So I'm ranking him 15th this week right now.
Yeah, and again, you are the high man on Gaskin. You're also the high man on Tua, assuming that he does end up playing. You have him in the top 10. The other guys, 16, 12, and 12. You've got him at 9. Is this the first time he's been in the top 10 for either of you guys this season?
It's got to be the first time he's been in the top, maybe 15. For me, this was the game, man. He's played pretty well. I realize from a real life perspective, he has some crushing turnovers, but obviously the offense has opened up a lot more with him, and I think he gets a lot of unnecessary criticism a little bit. Texans allow the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And again, it was, Joe mentioned it on our waiver wire show, it was sort of the narrative of, obviously they were talking about Deshaun Watson forever. Now they played the Texans. You would feel like Tua would want to come out here and have a good game. So the finger injury might affect where I push him down a little bit, but I guess if he goes, I'm still going to have him in my top 12.
Yeah, he's sort of a little bit, and I'm not making the comparison in terms of talent or fantasy impact, but he's a little like Lamar Jackson in that when he throws an interception, it looks so ugly that everybody like clowns them on Twitter, and they say, oh man, he doesn't know how to throw, oh man, what a bust. But more often than not, he is still making these quality throws. He can be very accurate. Obviously, he's a guy that can lift other guys on the team. You know, we are happily starting Waddle and Gaskin and Gesicki, so it's not like he's been so atrocious that he's ruining the fantasy seasons of these guys on the Dolphins. On the Texans, that sort of has been the case from Davis Mills, who has really hurt basically the entire offense. Not that there was a ton there to begin with, but we now have Tyrod Taylor coming back. So does that jump Brandin Cooks way up in your rankings? I have to assume it does.
I mean, it bumps it up from where it would be with Davis Mills, but it's still not something where I'm going too crazy right now with Cooks. I have him at 20, which I feel like is fair. I mean, you know, I like that Tyrod Taylor is suddenly this, well, Tyrod Taylor is back. All of our problems are solved, when really it's like, okay, at least we have a borderline, you know, competent quarterback at this point. On paper right now, it's a good matchup because the Dolphins secondary has been terrible, and I'm sure he'll be shadowed by Xavier Howard, and Howard hasn't been good, but it's still Xavier Howard, so I'm not exactly like, oh, look, it's going to be this amazing game. So he's a wide receiver 2 for me. Not going crazy with him, but certainly more appetizing with Tyrod Taylor than he would be with Davis Mills.
Yeah, Taylor was actually my favorite college quarterback of all time. I grew up a Virginia Tech fan, and watching him in Blacksburg was some of the coolest stuff I had seen. I was just at the right age where he was the guy that was really exciting to me. And obviously he's a Raven, so I've enjoyed watching him in his career. But yeah, you're not starting Taylor. Although I will say, you literally messaged me yesterday talking about my fantasy team and said I should start Tyrod Taylor. So I don't know why you have him as a sit here. Are you trying to sabotage me? What's going on?
Yes, to be clear, the other alternative was Mike White, and that looked actually dangerous right off the bat, but the injury probably saved me on that one. So yes, to be clear, I do have Tyrod Taylor higher than I had ranked Mike White, who I believe was 26th in my QB rankings of 28. So yes, there you go.
Well, I didn't end up picking up Taylor. I did end up picking who I didn't realize was available, Taysom Hill, who we thought was going to be a quarterback in the next game we're moving to here, Falcons at Saints. But, of course, it just came out again right before we started recording that Trevor Siemian will actually be getting the start for New Orleans this Sunday. So how does that impact pretty much everybody on the Saints for you? Are you still willing to start anybody, Alvin Kamara aside, or is this pretty much a sit across the board with Siemian?
It was still a sit across the board, except for Taysom Hill. I just didn't want it. You don't want the passing game, obviously, even though Hill has been a little more accurate than I feel like he's been given credit for. But you weren't starting, Marquez Callaway or Tre'Quan Smith in a good day. You could think about Mark Ingram, I guess, a little bit more, just because they'll probably lean into the run a little bit more to, and dink and dunk. But still, for me, it's Kamara, who's an obvious start, and then pretty much avoid everybody else.
So I have to imagine I'm not the only person who's in this scenario where, for whatever reason, maybe you have a guy on bye, maybe you're the Aaron Rodgers manager, and obviously everything going on there, who picked up Taysom Hill expecting that, it looks like he's going to get the start again this week. He can be a QB1 in fantasy with the rushing upside. We've seen that happen before when he filled in for Drew Brees. So if you're in a position like me where you did pick him up and you're now late in the week, what options are you looking at elsewhere in like a Superflex type format where the pickings might be pretty slim if you're the Hill owner?
It's a very good question. And, in a Superflex league, I imagine that most quarterbacks are rostered at this point, but I'll give you a different example. I'm in a 14-team league where I roster Tom Brady, and I missed out on Tua because I didn't bid enough, but I was able to pick up Hill, and now I've got this. So I'm probably turning, and it's disgusting, Ryan, and I apologize in advance. I'm probably turning to Jordan Love, who I actually think might have a decent game in this one. And I don't know where everybody else has him ranked. I think I have him ranked 17th at quarterback, or at least I did before I updated it. Let me just double check. Yeah, I have him 17th at quarterback. And so that's probably where I'm going, unless you can pick up a Kirk Cousins or Daniel Jones. But in a Superflex format or in a deeper league like mine, I am going to Jordan Love, and I think he'll have an okay game here. So that's my plan.
Well, we will discuss Love in more detail later. That is gross, as you mentioned. Let's not move on too quickly from the Falcons. Obviously, no Calvin Ridley still this week. We're assuming Cordero Patterson, Kyle Pitts, pretty obvious starts at this point in the season. Does Ridley's absence make Matt Ryan somebody that you want to stay away from, like pretty much regardless at this point? Or are you still willing to go back to him if it's a good matchup?
I think probably I'd consider him in a decent matchup, but this is far from what that is. So I wouldn't, I mean, if Ridley had played, I wouldn't have considered Ryan in this one anyway. But, who knows? No wide receivers playable, obviously, on their team, but they are professional athletes. They can make catches, and you've got Kyle Pitts, of course, and you've got Cordero Patterson who can make plays. So I still think Ryan is the type of guy who in the right matchup can rank in like the top 15, but it certainly lowers his ceiling a little bit.
Mike Davis is somebody that you were pretty high on before the season. Certainly hasn't played out as the sort of sleeper potential breakout guy that we were hoping for. Is he a pretty obvious sit still for you, again, in what is a tough matchup?
I'm listing him as a sit. I do think that there are situations where you'll have to start Mike Davis as a flex, and I don't hate that necessarily if you absolutely have to, because I do think the absence of Calvin Ridley does mean, as we saw last week, that he will be more involved, more carries, and more targets. But it's a terrible matchup against the Saints. It's not where you want to attack with running backs. So I do think that Davis's stock overall rest of season has gone up with the Ridley news, but I think in this game in particular, you want to avoid it if you can, and it's just a horrific matchup.
Lastly, on the Falcons, Russell Gage, Tajay Sharp, Olamide Zaccheaus. Are any of these guys interesting to you with Ridley out?
No.
Nice and easy. Let's move to the Raiders at the Giants. This is obviously a matchup that, I mean, again, we don't really need to get into the Henry Ruggs stuff in terms of off the field and everything, but it's sort of hard to tell what the offense is going to look like because Derek Carr has looked really good this season, and Ruggs has been a bit of a mini breakout so far this year. So what sort of changes do you expect to see out of the Raiders offense going into this game?
Yeah, I think you have to bump up certainly Hunter Renfrow, who just, is kind of like a 6 target per game type of guy. If you bump that to like 8 targets per game, which I think we probably should, then he becomes really intriguing on a week-to-week basis. And you have to move up Bryan Edwards, who again was kind of a very popular sleeper at draft season, but he just wasn't really getting that much of the work because Ruggs was taking it away. So I think both those guys see their rest of season outlook in particular go up, and in this game as well. And even like a very deep sleeper is somebody like Zay Jones, who I'm not going to consider in this game, but certainly rest of season. But in this game, you should start Hunter Renfrow in this one, and you can get away with starting Bryan Edwards.
Now, Joey P is not here on today's show, but I have to ask just to get your opinion of this incredible rankings disparity between you guys. He has Josh Jacobs 34th, and these were updated 3 days ago, to be fair, and you have him 14th. What's the reasoning behind that wild difference?
Well, I actually have him 16th, so I may have updated it. So it's a vast now it changes the whole equation with it. But yes, I have him 16th right now. But I think the short answer is that Joe's insane. I mean, I don't know what to do. Maybe he's worried about the injury, that he had sustained before the bye. But this is very clearly a matchup where you start Josh Jacobs. The Giants are not good against running backs. Jacobs has gotten the work. He's obviously going to factor in near the goal line. And the subtraction of Henry Ruggs does make the running game a little more appetizing. So I will say that I don't know where the consensus has him right now, but I will have to say that Joe's insane with that ranking.
And just quickly on Waller, obviously you're starting him, but with Ruggs gone, are you thinking that he could take another step forward and be even more featured in an offense that he already is a high-volume guy, or is he still pretty much exactly where he was?
Well, I know that fantasy managers have been upset about his lack of targets lately, and I get it. He had the 19 targets in the first game, and then he's just basically been around 6 to 7, sometimes even less. I do think this is probably a little bit of an uptick for him, but either way, I expected there to be a little regression with Waller, and even on his worst day, he's still a top, 7 or 8 tight end. So I do have him ranked second this week right now, 1 spot ahead of your guy, Mark Andrews, 1 spot behind Travis Kelce.
This might seem weird to ask, but I do think it is a relevant question. Saquon Barkley, let's assume he does play, Are you starting him right off of this absence? Because it is sometimes like guys come back when they're gone for multiple weeks, they just don't look the same. And it's not that the Raiders are too intimidating of a rush defense, but is that somebody that you are, I'm not even thinking about it, just set it and forget it, if Saquon's playing, he's in? Or are you considering other options?
So, first of all, right as you start asking that question, and I'm not exaggerating with that, there was a report from a beat writer that said that Saquon Barkley is not going to play this week. Now, assuming, again, that's just a beat writer report. If he were to play, it would have to depend on what the, likely, reports were on his workload. But I assume if he played, if he were healthy enough to play, he's not going to get 5 carries, right? He'd be 10 to 15 range. So I wouldn't rank him as the top, 7 back that we would expect him to be on a good day. But I would rank him as a starter, and I would probably have Booker more as a flex play anyway, because I would assume that he would still factor in. If he starts, you have to put him in your starting lineup.
And Kadarius Toney, how high of a ceiling do you think he can have this season? I know we're talking specifically about Week 9, but I'm just curious. Do you think he could have, again, sort of that Justin Jefferson second-half breakout this year?
Yeah, I really do, actually. It's all about health with him because what we have seen is so incredibly exciting. And Pat mentioned it after his, first breakout on our Sunday Night Recap show, that it did have the Odell Beckham Jr. rookie season vibes, right? A guy who wasn't really with the team very much early and then kind of broke out midway and then was just dominant rest of the season. He's electric when he gets the ball, but he's got to be fully healthy. And the fact is, like, you can tell, forget about the thumb injury. Like, I don't think he was fully over his ankle. So this is something where I would start him in this one for sure. I have him ranked 30th, so he's a wide receiver 3 for me. Rest of season, if he can stay healthy, I think he can absolutely explode this year.
Dan, let's move to the Patriots at the Panthers. Damien Harris is a guy that I know you have had as sort of a sell high candidate who might be a good opportunity to sort of move on from him in your leagues, but you still have him as a pretty clear start this week, right?
Yeah, you got to start him. And in this, it's not even a great matchup, but he's 13th right now. You've got 4 teams on bye, so that's going to do it. Yeah, he is going to get the work for sure. The reason I have him as a sell high candidate is, number one, like, with the number of touchdowns he scored, he's not going to do this. He's not going to score 5 touchdowns in 4 games like he's been on, and he doesn't factor into the passing game, and there are some tough matchups coming up. It wouldn't shock me if he struggles in this one. The Panthers defense, as they have gotten healthier, has gotten just much stronger, and they're a pretty good unit anyway. So, but still, at this point, like, there's no way you're benching Damien Harris if you roster him. So certainly fire him up as a start here.
A less obvious guy that you also have as a start is Jakobi Meyers. Dan, is this the week that he finally gets his touchdown?
If he does score a touchdown, they better stop the whole damn game and just do a giant celebration for the guy. I remember when he scored the touchdown, they called it back a penalty. I was so sad, and I was watching with Will. I don't know. Probably not. I mean, I have him as a start, but he's 40th, right? Like, that's like you're starting him as a flex or whatever. Probably no touchdown, I think. I don't know what the odds would be on it, but he's this pretty kind of, low ceiling, but pretty high floor, just given the volume, especially in PPR leagues. So you can get away with starting him, but I will bid against that touchdown.
Another guy that you are the low man on this week among the Fantasy Pros experts is Hunter Henry. You've got him 15th. Everybody else has him top 11. What are you not seeing with Henry?
The targets. That's same thing as CJ Uzomah, which is it's not a hard formula to figure out when you're talking about Dan Harris rankings over here. I think he's got 8 targets in his last 3 games. He needs to basically score a touchdown at this point to have value, and that's not novel, right? Like, you talk about that necessarily with most tight ends, that's what they need, but the yardage isn't there right now. It's basically touchdown or bust, which just puts them in a huge handful of guys. Again, 15th is a guy who you can start, but there are just some other guys who I prefer over him.
Sam Darnold was limited in practice on Thursday. Obviously, he left the Week 8 game. How much does his absence or perhaps presence impact where you're ranking the skill position guys in Carolina?
I'll probably drop them a little bit, but Sam Darnold is playing terribly. So I don't know how much of a downgrade right now would be to PJ Walker at this point. And again, realistically, you're only starting 2 guys for the Panthers here. You're starting DJ Moore, and you're starting whoever the running back happens to be. We don't know right now if it's going to be Christian McCaffrey or Chuba Hubbard. I personally am expecting Hubbard. I would still start, of course, both DJ Moore and whoever the running back is, regardless of the quarterback. But my guess is that PJ Walker would probably drop more, 4 4 or 5 spots in my wide receiver rankings. A tough matchup for Moore, by the way, this week anyway, because he's going to get J.C. Jackson, but you're starting him regardless of the quarterback.
DJ Moore, a Terp. J.C. Jackson, also a Terp. Just have to mention that real quick. So,
Very
again,
good.
on McCaffrey, sort of similar to Saquon, you're not worried about a multi-week absence. If he's on the field, he's going to be in your lineup.
Without question. I mean, if you roster Christian McCaffrey and he plays and you don't start him, you are just not doing fantasy correctly.
Fair enough. Moving on to the Bills at Jaguars, and I want to specifically mention in this game, and I accidentally stumbled across this, Dan, your very last ranked player of every player that you ranked this week, that is flex eligible, is Luke Farrell of the Jaguars. And I'm curious, how did you come to that determination? Why him?
He came out as the last sort of quote-unquote fantasy relevant, which is like a term that I don't even mean in a regular way. I mean like could score any sort of semblance of a point in my projections, which, by the way, how I do it is I make my projections, and I don't rely on them for my rankings. I tweak based on that. But once you get down to the terrible people, I just leave it where it is because I'm just going to trust it. And Luke Farrell is the last guy who could get a fantasy point but not be relevant.
Well, funnily enough, I didn't mention it, but on the Colts, Kylan Granson is your second to last ranked player. And so when he caught I think it was like a 27-yard reception in the game last night, I was sort of laughing like, oh, wow, he's going to be way higher where it ends up coming out.
Clearly an error on my part. That's my fault.
What were you thinking, Dan? I have no idea. On the Bills and Jaguars, obviously Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, even coming off a bad game, Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, this is a smash play, right, against the Jaguars?
Yes, for sure. You start everybody. I think Sanders is going to have a big bounce back game here. I mean, he should have. Tyson Campbell is one of the worst graded cornerbacks in Pro Football Focus. So I expect him to have a good game. I mean, I would watch Cole Beasley because he's had the rib injury. So hopefully he goes. If so, he's got a good matchup again against Rudy Ford. And again, no Dawson Knox here. He was ruled out earlier today. So that certainly helps all of them.
Yep. So you're starting pretty much every Bill. On the Jags, if James Robinson does play, I assume you'll be starting him. You have Marvin Jones Jr. as a flex option, so you're not excited about him. And pretty much the rest of the team is a sit. Is there anybody that in a crunch you're most willing to want to start?
I mean, I guess you could start Jamal Agnew just because he's been sort of what we hoped Laviska Shenault could be. But realistically, I don't even want to start Marvin Jones, although this is the matchup with Tre'Davious White, a team that dominates wide receivers. That's the game that Marvin Jones scores 3 touchdowns and goes crazy and stuff like that. So realistically, I'm avoiding everyone other than Robinson and Jones if he plays. And by the way, if Robinson does not play, I really don't want to start Carlos Hyde as sort of the backup guy. I would still probably be ranking Carlos Hyde probably as like a low-end flex.
Yeah, if I never start Carlos Hyde again, it'll be too soon. A lot of people on Twitter have been asking us all week about Dan Arnold. There is some growing hype around him as a sleeper tight end option. You've got him 13th. That's tied for highest among the Fantasy Pros guys. You still do have him listed as a sit. Is that somebody that you're still willing to throw out there in a pinch, though?
I probably should have mentioned him then. I had what my start sit was basically anybody outside my top 12, and that is Dan Arnold. Arnold is a passable option, but there are guys who I think are probably ranked behind him in our expert consensus rankings that I want to start over him, like Pat Freiermuth, for example. Like that's a guy who I would start over Dan Arnold. So Dan Arnold is definitely a guy who you can get away with in a pinch for sure. And again, he's close to a starting option. But for me, again, I just don't really want to go there for my fantasy production if I can avoid it.
Moving on to Vikings at Ravens, obviously a very compelling game to me. This should be a pretty high-powered game, I would think. The Ravens' defense has not been the defense of yesteryear. They have really struggled ever since Marcus Peters' injury. So this is obviously, you're never sitting Lamar Jackson. Hollywood Brown, I would say, has pretty clearly earned every week must-start status so far this year. Mark Andrews, obviously similar. Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. Just to name those names, we're clearly starting all of those guys. Tyler Conklin is another tight end that folks are pretty excited about this week. Is he a sit for you, or excuse me, a start for you?
He is. He's sort of a guy. Again, that's a guy probably in the Dan Arnold range where I could see people being like, oh, I want Arnold, and I would be fine with that. I mean, he's been more involved of late. He's got at least 10 PPR points in both of his last 2 games, and Baltimore allows the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So, I mean, they face some good ones, but still, that is something to notice. So, yeah, they're going to need points here. I expect Baltimore off a bye to be able to put up some some big numbers. So with points needed, I at least expect Conklin to get more volume than he's used to.
Yeah, and the Ravens have struggled against tight ends, not just this season, but for the last couple of years. It's been their biggest weakness defensively under Don Wink Martindale as their defensive coordinator. So pretty much week in, week out, I'm always excited to start a tight end against them. You do have Kirk Cousins as a sit. Again, this is a defense that hasn't been very good this year. So what is scaring you away from Cousins?
There are a couple things, and again, this is the usual caveat. I know people don't like it, but Yates and I give it often, which is he's 15th for me, but the difference between him being, 12th and 15th is not great, so I don't mean to necessarily fade him. Really, the issue for me is that, number one, Cousins has not been particularly good of late. 3 of his last 4 games, he's kind of laid duds a little bit. And it's not bad in the fact that, Baltimore blitzes a ton and Cousins is actually pretty good against the blitz, but I also do not like John Harbaugh off a bye. That is scary. I think they've got time to prepare their defense for it. So I think they'll have some exotic looks for Cousins. Again, that doesn't mean that you fade the wide receivers necessarily or fade Conklin, because all of them can have good games without Cousins really having a great game. So he's a guy who, again, you can start if you absolutely have to. For me, I have some other guys ranked ahead of him.
Couple of injury notes on the Ravens. Latavius Murray still hasn't practiced this week as of the time we're recording this Friday morning. He is somebody that obviously didn't practice. He missed a game. He didn't practice all week, and then they had the bye, and then he didn't practice all week again. So it seems pretty clear to me that he's not going to play on Sunday.
Yep.
Sammy Watkins did return to practice on Thursday. Are you interested in starting either him or Rashad Bateman, even if Sammy does return to the field?
I'm definitely not interested in starting Sammy Watkins because I just, with him getting back, it puts a damper on Rashad Bateman, a guy who I like and I kind of want to start. I'd probably take a little bit more of a wait and see, although the Vikings secondary is just decimated right now, and their whole defense as a whole just is bad right now. And because the Ravens can't really run the ball because they don't really have, a running back, that there's going to be increased pass volume. So you could probably still get away with Bateman as kind of a mid-tier, low-end flex, but I'd be far less excited about him than I am now.
Yeah, please do not start any Ravens running backs in this game or any other game the rest of the season unless we see something change dramatically. Chargers at the Eagles. We're moving into the late afternoon games here. Again, on the Eagles, it's sort of obvious, you're starting Jalen Hurts with the rushing upside. Dallas Goedert has gotten the volume, in the targets and everything in the passing game since Zach Ertz left. On these running backs, probably the thing that people got maddest at us about all of last week was Kenneth Gainwell. So he's a sit for you. Are you confidently starting Boston Scott, or do you think there's a chance that this could be the Gainwell game?
Yeah, I certainly think that it's going to be a better game for Gainwell than it was last week, because I do think that they'll probably be trailing in this game a little bit, given what we talked about earlier when we were doing the over-under challenge with Herbert. So I do think that they'll be trailing, and that should mean more work for Gainwell in the passing game. I'm starting Scott if I have him, but last I checked last night because I did the kickoff and I was looking at where I was versus everybody else, I'm 27th. I think ECR last night was 23rd. I don't know if it's still there necessarily, so I'm fading him a little bit compared to consensus just because we saw John Howard factor in a little bit, right? They both got 12 carries, and maybe it is the Gainwell game, but Gainwell will be doing it on my bench. Scott would be, in my flex spot. So not super excited about it, but I'm willing to roll with him.
Everybody at Fantasy Pros has Devontae Smith as a mid wide receiver 3 this week. That seems a little high to me, so I'm wondering if you can explain it. He really hasn't done much this season in the last couple of weeks, particularly 31 yards, 61, 15 yards. He only has the 1 touchdown, which came back in week 1. This is a tough matchup. The Chargers, for as much as they allow on the ground, they are pretty stingy through the air. What about Devontae Smith is enough to make you and the rest of the Fantasy Pros experts think that he's worth starting?
There is no way you can feel confident starting Devontae Smith right now, just given how up and down he has been. I do think the targets will be there in this game. Again, I expect them to be trailing a little bit here. But really, Ryan, what it comes down to is the fact that he's ranked 35th for me, right? That's like the very, very low-end wide receiver 3, assuming a 12-team league here. The guys ranked behind him are Christian Kirk, who's obviously hit or miss on any given week, and we have questions about Kyler Murray. Marvin Jones, we just talked about it. Julio Jones, we don't know if he's going to play, and he gets the Rams. Bryan Edwards, who obviously it's a bit of a leap of faith here. Jakobi Meyers. None of these guys inspires confidence once you get to that range. So for me, At that point, I rely on A, the talent, because I do think that he is one of the more talented wide receivers in the league. B, the fact that I do expect him to get targets in this game because I think it's going to be a negative game script here for him. So that's really it for me. But I will say you are correct in that I am not confident in that, but I'm just not confident in anybody who's ranked in that range.
You're starting Eckler, you're starting Keenan Allen, you're obviously starting Justin Herbert. Mike Williams is listed by everybody as a clear, obvious start, but he hasn't really done much in recent weeks either. He's coming off 19 yards, bye week, 27 yards. Big game against the Browns, but the game before that, 11 yards. So in 4 of the last 5 weeks, he really hasn't given your fantasy team anything. Why are you confident on him?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say that I'm not. I'm ranking him as an obvious wide receiver too, because I just think he did so much early on in the season, and he always has the talent to have a huge game any single time he's on the field if they can work out getting him the ball more. It's a really bad matchup for. I mean, he's going to get shadowed by Slay almost without a doubt. And, Darius Slay has been exceptional in coverage this whole year, so it is a bad matchup. But in the end, it's just it's really hard to fade either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen in any matchup, just given the ceiling that they showed in the beginning of the season. So again, he's a wide receiver 2 for me. I had been ranking him, for a while before the slide, Ryan, as like a wide receiver 1. He has slowly been going down in my rankings. So. Yeah, and if he does again, then I'll probably need to reconsider it. But for right now, he does seem healthy at the very least, which was starting to be a concern before. So I'm going to give him another shot as a wide receiver 2. It's very difficult. Again, we just talked about, right, where are the wide receiver 3s when we're talking about Devontae Smith. Gets ugly pretty quickly. So a guy like Mike Williams, who's at least shown it really this year, you want to start.
Jared Cook, you've got in the same range as the Dan Arnolds and the Tyler Conklins of the world. Let's move on to what was supposed to be the biggest game of the week before Aaron Rodgers contracted COVID. It's now Jordan Love versus Patrick Mahomes. We still cannot get Mahomes-Rodgers, no matter how much we want to see this eventually. I will give you the floor. You said that you are starting Jordan Love in at least one league. You touched on it earlier. Give me a little more on him.
Okay, first of all, I will say I'm starting Jordan Love in a league that's 14 teams deep, and it's an expert league. It's an FSGA league where there is no one available right now. So I am starting Love, but I do have him ranked 17th, so that does deserve something. Here's the deal. First of all, he's been in the system now, okay? So this is not like a random guy coming in. Like, he's been the backup there for now more than a season, so he is quite familiar with the system. He has one of, if not the single best wide receiver in the game in Davante Adams, who should be back for this game. He faces a team that gives up a ton of points to opposing quarterbacks and generally stinks. He has mobility, so he can sort of add that cheat code a little bit and add in some points with his legs. Add that all up. I do not feel confident in Jordan Love as a regular quarterback in this game. I don't even really feel confident with him as a fantasy quarterback in this game. But when I'm looking at the other options who are in that range, here, let me just very quickly say who's right behind him in it. Right now, I have Jordan Love ahead of Teddy Bridgewater, who I've talked about why I have some issues with. Tyrod Taylor, who, again, talked about, not guys I'm really excited to start. Ben Roethlisberger against Chicago. You're never happy to start Ben Roethlisberger. Matt Ryan, we talked about him. Not excited to start him. So really, when you get to that range at 17, I'm like, all right, I've got a really good matchup. I've got a really good wide receiver. I've got his ability to contribute with his legs. I'll give him a roll. So there it is. Quarterback 17, all in apparently on Jordan Love.
Even with Love, you're still starting Aaron Jones and Davante Adams, obviously, sitting the other guys. Chiefs are also pretty easy. You're starting the studs, Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey, Darrell Williams. I do want to ask, what would it take for you to start Derek Gore coming off of his surprise Week 8?
16 injuries to running backs ahead of him. Yeah, this is not, people freaked out about that. It was really a drive that he just happened to sort of run with and get there at the end. Darrell Williams still was in on the vast majority of snaps. He got the vast majority of touches. So Gore is a guy who, if you are absolutely dead at running back, I think I have him 40th maybe at running back. So you'd have to be pretty desperate.
Cardinals at 49ers, a 425 start. Elijah Mitchell limited in practice on Thursday, obviously been one of the really nice surprises of the season when he's been on the field. You're starting him if he plays. George Kittle if he plays. You're starting Deebo Samuel. Among the guys that you have down as sits, do you think any of them have a chance to surprise us this week? And I know that in a Kyle Shanahan offense, the answer is yes, but is there anybody that you think might have a better chance than one of the others of surprising us this week?
I think part of it is going to depend on George Kittle. If he does come back, and if he does come back, where, what his snaps are. But obviously, there have been signs of life from Brandon Ayuk, enough so that I would want to be rostering him. I don't want to start him in this one. I'm trying to find where I have him in this one, but it is low. It is 51st at wide receiver. So that's outside of even flex range for me. But if there was a guy to go crazy, because we know how talented he is, we've seen it. So he would be sort of the guy who I'd want to go there. And again, if Elijah Mitchell is going to be limited or maybe even not start, then obviously, JaMychal Hasty, because I don't think you can go near Trey Sermon because it's Trey Sermon. But unless Jeff Wilson is activated off, the PUP list, JaMychal Hasty would probably be a guy you'd have to consider.
How good of a backup quarterback would you need on your roster to play them over Kyler Murray?
If Kyler Murray goes, it's a great question, actually, right? If Kyler Murray goes in this one, and I guess I'm expecting him to go, people may know by the time they listen to this. Right now, I have Murray ranked 8th. So guys ahead of him are all guys who are just obvious locked-in starts. So in other words, there is no situation. If Murray goes, as much as I would temper my expectations, I've got to start him out there.
And if he doesn't go, how far are you dropping the rest of the offense? You mentioned earlier that you are fading the Cardinals if Murray isn't playing. Are you still starting Edmonds, Connor, Kirk, Ertz, or are they dropping far enough that you might actually consider not playing them?
Yeah, I probably would start. I'd start both running backs just because I think that if it is, Colt McCoy, you're probably going to see a lot of running and them trying to control the clock and dump offs and stuff like that. So both running backs would still start. It might depend on DeAndre Hopkins, because if Hopkins is out, then I feel like maybe you just do start. And we've got AJ Green on the COVID list. Who knows if he's going to play? You might have to start Christian Kirk by default. And it actually I might still go with Zach Ertz if DeAndre Hopkins is out, just because I think McCoy would probably lean on a veteran presence. But it hurts everybody. It downgrades the projections for everybody. And again, even if Murray plays, you really have to, keep things in check. I think the 49ers win this game. And again, they didn't play that well the last time they played the 49ers, and that was when Murray was completely healthy.
Make sure you keep an eye on AJ Green if you are in a position where you might have been starting him in a deeper league. He was placed in the COVID reserve list. I don't know if it's been official now that he's going to miss this game. So yeah, just be sure to double check on that if you've got him on your roster. Sunday Night Football, Titans at Rams. A couple weeks ago, I would have said this game is kind of gross, but now it actually looks pretty good. Arguably the two best, the two teams atop their conferences at the very least in the standings right now. A couple of obvious starts again, A.J. Brown among them. Without Derrick Henry, are you starting Adrian Peterson?
No, I'm not going to start Adrian Peterson in this game. I just can't imagine he walks into like 20 touches or something in it. He'll get some work. He might get it. I think I've got him 33rd at running back. So that's a spot where he's going to probably fall outside of sort of the flex wide receiver. So he would be a sit for me. But again, if you are absolutely desperate, if you cannot get possibly away from it because you need a running back and everybody's on bye or everybody's injured, then I could see a scenario where you have to start him. But me personally, I'm trying to avoid him here in this first game.
How much higher do you have Jeremy McNichols in your rankings than Adrian Peterson?
7 spots. I have him at 26. So he is a guy actually who, if I had both of them, I would be looking to start McNichols in this game over Adrian Peterson. Number one, he knows the playbook. Of course, he's been involved in the offense for good. I expect them to need points. That is where McNichols is going to factor in here. So McNichols is actually a guy who I consider kind of more of a stronger flex play in this one, just because of how involved I expect him to be in the passing game.
Julio Jones did practice on Thursday. You're playing him if he does end up playing in this game. Does the loss of Henry, in your eyes, help or hurt Ryan Tannehill's fantasy value going forward? Obviously, you would expect more volume, but maybe the defenses are more keyed in on the passing game. Well, not maybe. They will be more keyed in on the passing game. So how do you square that, sort of those two, opposing viewpoints?
I think it's probably a net even type thing, right? I think you're almost certainly going to see more of a volume from Tannehill, but it's probably going to be less efficient just because, as you mentioned, teams are not going to have to respect the run as much. I don't expect the Titans to all of a sudden drastically change their offensive philosophy, but if you have a healthy Julio Jones and a healthy A.J. Brown, you can do a lot of damage as a passer. So for me this week, especially in the tough matchup, I have him at 16th, so I'd start him over Jordan Love. He's above the Jordan Love line, but for me, he's not a guy who I'm particularly excited about, obviously, this week.
The infamous Jordan Love line.
That will be our line from now on going forward.
You're definitely starting all the Rams, Kupp, Woods, Henderson, Stafford, Higbee. You've got Van Jefferson as a start as well. Moving on to Monday Night Football, Bears at Steelers. Could end up being a fairly ugly game. We'll hope for some good primetime football here. Obviously, you're starting Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. Are you confidently starting Pat Freiermuth coming off the touchdown?
As much as you can confidently start any non-elite tight end, right? I mean, look, he's got 7 targets in back-to-back games. And again, you see that end zone reception that he had last week. That is a throw that Roethlisberger does not make unless he trusts his pass catcher to rip that ball away and come down with it. And that shows me at least that when they get down to the end zone, you've got Roethlisberger and you've got a receiver who he trusts. That's enough for me to rank him in the top 12. He is 11th for me, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm starting him over a lot of these, kind of fringe guys there.
I like how every time I ask, how confidently are you starting this guy? You're like, not confident, but I kind of have to start him.
That is, by the way, how you fantasy football for the most part. It'd be like, there are 20 guys who I'm really confidently starting, and everybody else I'm like, not real confident, but I'm obviously starting. But I will say this about Freiermuth. I think there are like 5 tight ends who you can confidently start. Beyond that, it's all like, oh, I don't know. But Freiermuth is a guy who, if I roster, I'm almost certainly starting this week.
You're not starting anybody else in the Steelers. On the Bears, I mean, they're going up obviously against one of the best defenses in football. Justin Fields finally had his big breakout game. That touchdown rush was incredible that he had against the 49ers. Are you starting anybody for Chicago against the Steelers, or is this a total stay away for you?
I think you kind of have to start Khalil Herbert just given, his volume. He's just been getting, 18 touches a game for like 4 straight games. Damien Williams, it was questionable. I don't know if he's going to be ruled out for this game, but even if he plays, I don't think he's going to or deserves to take a big workload from Khalil Herbert. So against a very difficult matchup with the Steelers, strong defense. But he's a guy who, if I roster, I'm probably rolling out there as an RB2, and I'm avoiding everybody else.
Both for this week and in the rest of the season, what is your advice to the Allen Robinson manager?
Cry, and eat a lot of ice cream, which is generally what I do, mostly because my wife makes me. There is no reason to be optimistic on Allen Robinson. It is very difficult for me to see a plausible path for somehow we wake up one day and we were like, holy crap, Allen Robinson got 10 targets and caught 8 of them for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's not going to happen in this offense. So I have him ranked 47th. That's again, guys who are total dart throws at this point. Maybe something happens. It's not like the Steelers completely shut down wide receivers. But yeah, I don't know. If you can find somebody who still somehow believes in him because he has a history of success, then get rid of him.
Dan, we did it. We made it through every matchup. They said it couldn't be done, but we somehow managed to get through it. Now, before we go, according to yourself on Twitter, I owe you a bit of an apology for springing a question on you at the end of our Tuesday episode this week, in which I asked for your 3 favorite Seinfeld episodes of all time. So keep it quick, but not if you had a few days. I want to give you the floor if you'd like to make any addendums that you feel are necessary.
No, I refuse to do this. I'm going to stand on whatever I said when I had no idea what I was saying because I had to do something. But here's the deal, sir. I understand you like to ask a lot of these pop culture questions. I would like to make a request that you at least tell me the general genre of any question that you're going to ask next time, and I will get in on it. But you and I talked about it, how we could probably have conversations in Seinfeld lines. So we may do that for an entire podcast. Next week if you're up for that.
Well, I do have in my notes, and I have in little parentheses, so Dan isn't a big crybaby again. And now, to give you plenty of time to think ahead, let me warn you what next week's question will be.
Yes, please.
I'm going to ask you for your top 3 favorite episodes of Community, which obviously makes sense considering this is Dan and Ryan in the morning. Hopefully this is more than enough time for you to come up with your list.
I think that's fair. I believe a week will be sufficient. I already have one in mind, but I'm not gonna have it. Yes. By the way, just so everybody knows, Yates' wife is having a baby. She may have already had it by now, hopefully. So that is why it is Ryan, who is a very clearly superior host to me on this podcast, instead of Yates, and why it will likely be Ryan again next week instead of Yates. Don't worry, nothing happened to Yates.
I would also like to make clear that Yates' wife having the baby is not an excuse for him to catch up on Community in the meantime while he's on paternity leave. I'm sure he has nothing else going on over the next couple of weeks. So hopefully I am welcomed back with open arms next week by you, Dan, although I'm sure you will certainly tell me that I am not. Either way, I'm very much looking forward to coming back. Thank you for having me on today. Thank you to Prize Picks and Pristine Auction. And as always, thank you most of all to the listeners. For Dan, I'm Ryan. We will see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.